Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Raider's Bride by Kimberly Cates, narrated by Timothy Campbell. Prologue. Virginia, 1772. The hunger was inside him again, dark and wild. Pendragon leaned low over the neck of his stallion, the wind tearing at the silvery folds of his cape and penetrating the thin layer of his silken mask. He was consumed by the danger, bewitching and seductive, as primitive as the release found in the wet heat between a woman's thighs. For only when fencing with death itself did the legendary patriot raider feel alive. He glanced over his shoulder to where a dozen of his horsemen ribboned out behind him, lit by the torches clasped in their hands. The rebel band was as deadly as an assassin's stiletto, and tonight they had done their work well. Pendragon's mouth curled in a feral grin as he regarded their quarry. A man, bound and gagged, rode belly down over a bay gelding, his nightshirt flapping like a banner in the wind. He seemed a laughable captive at best, one whom no one would have judged worthy of the attention of a notorious rogue, whose legends stretched 100 miles up the coast of the colony of Virginia. But that was what had made the captive, Lemming Crane, so useful to the English. He was intelligent enough to follow orders, yet had the appearance of a fool, so that no one would ever suspect him of being a spy. When Pendragon thought of how close Crane had come to discovering the truth, the raider's jaw knotted. No, it didn't matter. They had discovered Crane's treachery in time. Tonight Pendragon would make certain no other English spy would dare to challenge him again. Crystal blue eyes shimmered with violence between the slits in the raider's mask. There was only one way to crush a nest of spies once and for all, and that was to obliterate one of them with such horrifying finality that the others would wake up a dozen years from now still drenched with the sweat of their terror. The raider's mouth hardened as he saw the flicker of light through the trees, a glowing eye born of darkness and demons. He tightened his knees about his stallion and reined Mordred through a break in the woods. The sinister glimmer of light became the entry to a cave, illuminated by the torches of the raiders who waited there. A single support post shored up the cave's crumbling entry. The thick length of wood was the only thing keeping the arch from collapsing beneath a hillside of earth and rock. It had been called Brigand's Cave for 100 years, a haven of dark legends that clung thick within the chamber of stone, pooling in the craggy shadows. If ever there had been a sight fashioned to inspire terror, this was it. As Pendragon wheeled his mount to face his captive, he was certain that Lemming Crane had heard tales of the spirits said to walk here, victims of Indian massacres, of murder and witchery. Spirits the wigmaker was no doubt afraid that he would soon join, courtesy of Pendragon's sword. There had been a time when the raider might have felt pity for the terrified man, a time when Pendragon might have shrunk from what he was doing, though aware it was a painful necessity. But whatever compassion had once remained in his black heart had been deadened long ago, leaving a ruthlessness that terrified not only his enemies, but sometimes his allies as well. In a fluid motion, Pendragon swung from the saddle and turned to watch as 2 of his men dragged Cain from the bay. They hauled the wigmaker between them, flinging him into the glaringly bright interior of the cave. Despite the cords binding him, Crane attempted to scrabble away from them, but his back slammed up against a fallen boulder. There was a soft sound of boots against the cave floor as Pendragon's second-in-command, Sir Tristan, came forward and unfastened the gag from the wigmaker's mouth. Sir Tristan kept one steadying hand on Crane's shoulder as the man coughed and sputtered. "Welcome to my corner of hell, Tory spy," said Pendragon, the raider's voice velvet-soft. "Can you feel the devil watching you?" A wave of grim laughter rose up from Pendragon's men, and Crane's pasty features whitened further. "Please," the wigmaker begged. "I've done you no harm." "Not for lack of trying, I am told. It was really quite an inspired plan, Mr. Crane. You playing the honest colonist in desperate need of aid from Pendragon's raiders, your shop ransacked by British soldiers, destroyed because of rumours you had guns stored there. If it hadn't been for a certain Private Luden's love affair with a bottle, we might have ridden straight into the trap you had set for us tonight." "You would believe a drunken fool." "A dozen armed men were hiding in the area surrounding your house. If Tristan hadn't set the guardhouse afire to lure them away, we might have been hangman's fodder. And you would be counting out your 30 pieces of silver." Pendragon paused. "Tell me, Crane, just for curiosity's sake, how much am I worth to the Crown at the moment? What would they pay the man who fits a noose around my neck?" Crane hesitated. £1,000, and any lands or assets in your name. Blood money. An ugly way to make a fortune. Much cruder than, say, gambling or abducting an heiress. Of course, with the regrettable lack of morals these days, I'm certain you're not the only one hungering for the king's purse. His voice grew paralyzingly soft. Tell me, Crane, who else scurries like a rat in the night, wanting to feast on my flesh? How should I know? I've no interest in the others. We are competing for the same reward money, and they would only rob from my purse. Pendragon turned and paced back to the support post, caressing it with one white-gloved hand. Crane, have you ever wondered what it would be like to be buried alive? Entombed with your eyes still open, your heart yet beating. A strangled sound came from Crane's throat. If this length of wood should be ripped from its place, allowing the mouth of the cave to collapse, sealing you off from the world, how long do you suppose the air in this little antechamber would last before your lungs began to burn? How long before starvation clawed at your stomach, or thirst consumed you until you licked at the cave walls to drink what moisture clings there? How long will it take for madness to devour you as you sit alone in darkness waiting to see Lucifer's fate? A piteous sob racked Crane, and he fell to his knees, grovelling before Pendragon. You cannot do this. I know nothing. Pendragon planted his glossy boot on Crane's shoulder and shoved him away. Search your memory. Surely you must have heard something, a bit of information about someone else in your despicable profession. At the very least, you could tell me who you run to with your scraps of betrayal. I go to Atwood, the garrison commander, or to Major Glendenning, whoever will give me the largest purse, and they pass the information on to someone. To someone? That is distressingly non-specific, Mr. Crane. Surely you know this person's name. Do you think they would tell someone like me? I just do what they tell me and ask no questions. Crane, you are supposed to be a spy, someone whose profession is discovering information disastrous to those he betrays. Yet you tell me nothing I don't already know. It is extraordinarily trying. Shaking his head in mock regret, Pendragon crossed to where the wooden support post was a slash of black against the torchlight. With great deliberation he stripped off one glove and ran his fingertips over the rough wood. Perhaps you have heard of my regrettable lack of virtue, spy. Patience in particular is an attribute I lack. Pendragon levelled Crane with the piercing gaze that had made far braver men quake. My stallion is tethered to a tree outside. All I need to do is bind a rope about this support and tie it about the beast's saddle. The slightest pressure of my knees would make him strain against the rope, tear the length of wood free. No, please! It is very simple to stop me. You just have to give me the information I seek. Who else takes Captain Atwood's blood money? Who else slinks through the dark to play Judas for this mysterious man whose name you do not know? If I knew anything, I would tell, Crane vowed. I swear by God and all the saints I would. An oath from a spy? Pendragon gave an ugly laugh. I'd wager it holds the same value as a whore's vow of faithfulness. Please, my Lord Pendragon, Pendragon held up one hand, and Crane choked into silence. Sir Tristan, it appears that our guest is determined to be difficult. I'm afraid we shall need the rope. Tristan stepped away from the crescent of men, coils of hemp bundled in his arms. Pendragon felt a surge of almost certain triumph as Crane's face turned green. With great deliberation, Tristan knotted the cord about the length of wood, giving the knot a tug to secure it. Then he turned to the man staring up at him in horror. The Crown cannot help you now, he warned. Atwood will just find someone else to take your place. He'll cast you aside with no more thought than he'd spare a soiled glove. Tell us what we need to know, and perhaps I can persuade Pendragon to show mercy. Crane turned pleading eyes to Tristan, clutching at his arm. I would if I knew anything at all. With the slightest movement of one hand, Pendragon signalled, and two burly men stepped forward, their hands closing on Crane's shoulders. Pendragon, this man is a cowardly dog to the very marrow of his bones, Tristan said. If he had the slightest bit of information, he would give it to you. I'd swear it on my mother's grave. It is not your mother's grave we gamble upon. There was an edge to Pendragon's voice, an answering spark in Tristan's green-gold eyes. If you should be mistaken, Sir Tristan, the forfeit paid would be the death of every man here. Since Crane cannot or will not give us the names we need, our only way to terrorize the other spying bastards is to make our vengeance against him so grisly no other would dare to continue hunting Pendragon or his raiders. Now bind the end of the rope to Mordred." A sick light darted into Tristan's eyes, tension rippling off him in thick waves, a tension all too familiar of late. "But to bury the man alive," he reasoned. "I'm telling you I don't think this is necessary. The bravest of men would have broken by now, and this pathetic wretch is far from—" "Bind the rope to my stallion." Tristan stiffened as if Pendragon had struck him. Crane struggled to reach Tristan, all but incoherent in his desperate quest to reach his unlikely ally, yet his captors held firm. Pendragon's jaw clenched as Tristan, on the brink of outright defiance, cast one more glance at the wigmaker. But at the last possible moment Tristan turned with an oath and disappeared through the mouth of the cave. Pendragon released a breath from his lungs that burned. "Gawain and Dinadan, you will loosen our guest's binding so that he may free himself when the cave is sealed. We want him to be able to embrace the demons when they come for him." The two men who held Crane swiftly completed the task, and the wigmaker crumpled to the ground, his sobs unintelligible against the cave's floor. Pendragon took a torch from the grasp of one of his men, then with a jerk of his head signalled them to leave. They filed out, some hastily, as if fearing they themselves would be caught in their leader's trap, others slowly, as if dazed. Pendragon watched them go, his mouth twisting with sardonic amusement. "I'm afraid my men have less stomach for meting out justice than I do. However, I do not tolerate disobedience. They know it well." The raider jammed the torch into a crack in the cave floor. "And now I fear I must bid you adieu, Monsieur Wigmaker. When you meet with the devil, request that he save a particularly blazing spot in hell for Pendragon. God knows I've laboured hard enough to earn it." Sketching Crane an elegant bow, Pendragon wheeled around in a cloud of silver and stalked out into the night. "I know nothing!" Crane's screams echoed behind him as he crossed the clearing. "Have mercy!" Tristan stood holding Mordred's reins, and in spite of the mask covering his friend's features, Pendragon knew how they must appear. Angry, almost betrayed. "You're going too far, man," Tristan grated, his voice raw with disbelief. "Don't do this, for the love of God." With gloved hands, Pendragon pulled the reins out of his friend's clenched fingers. "It is already done." In one fluid movement, the raider swung astride Mordred, the slightest pressure of his knees ordering the mighty stallion to surge forward. The rope hissed as it uncoiled. Then the hemp snapped taut, the stallion hesitating only an instant before straining against it. With a horrible sound, the support snapped free, thudding dully across the ground. The stallion shied, rearing and plunging in an effort to free itself, but Pendragon soothed him into submission, reining the animal around. The raider stared at the cave's entry, lit with glowing orange from the single torch that remained inside. For long seconds the stone arch hung as if balanced by the devil's hand. Then, with a hideous sound, an avalanche of stone and earth crashed down, sealing the English spy in Pendragon's gateway to hell. Chapter 1. Candlelight splintered in a sea of prisms, flinging miniature rainbows across the room aptly named the Chambre d'Amour at Blackheath Hall. It was a room intended to tempt angels away from heaven's gates, a sensual banquet of texture and colour. Mythical lovers were painted in carnal ecstasy from floor to ceiling. Thick white furs were scattered near the hearth, while imported candies, called nipples of Venus, waited on a silver tray to be tasted by tongues hungry from love play. Countless women had been entertained in Ian Blackheath's notorious den of sin, at house parties as decadent as any Roman orgy, and at gambling fetes in which a king's ransom had been won or lost on the turn of a single card. Yet beneath this seeming decadence even more sinister affairs had taken place. Blackheath, that ruthless speculator whose loyalty was said to reach no deeper than the bottom of his own purse, had enriched his treasury here with patriot coin. Contraband weapons had been bartered in the dark of night, precious guns and black powder that had been smuggled into the colonies on Ian's fleet of ships had been sold to desperate men, eager to fuel the fires of revolution, a cause so noble that everyone was certain a soulless opportunist like Blackheath could never understand it. But tonight there would be nothing so amusing as love play, or so exhilarating as a revolution happening in these opulent rooms. Rather, Ian could sense another type of battle brewing, if the expression in Anthony Gray's hazel eyes was any indication. Ian supposed he should consider himself lucky that Tony had waited for the servants to scatter to the far wings of the house before beginning his tirade. but the footman who had served refreshments after they'd arrived at the plantation house had disappeared moments before, and it seemed Ian's brief reprieve was at an end. Resigned, he lounged against the back of a crimson divan, and stretched his long legs out before him, a generous glass of brandy cradled in one hand. He sighed. "I suppose it would be useless to point out that you could have followed the example of the other men and been indulging in your lady's charms at this very moment, instead of wearing a rut in my oriental carpets and peeling the paint off my murals with the heat of your scowls. What I'd like to do is wring your bloody neck." The violence in Gray's usually reasonable tone made Ian grimace. "You cold-blooded son of a bitch," Tony raged. "I practically begged you not to entomb Crane alive. Damn it, there was no reason to do it." Ian skimmed his fingers beneath the thick fall of his dark mane, kneading an area where the knot of his mask had chafed hours before. "I should have guessed what your fierce insistence upon trailing me home from our raids meant. A lecture in brigand's etiquette." "Damn it, Ian, this is no jest. Have mercy, Tony, have mercy," Ian groaned, interrupting him. He leaned his head back against the red cushions. "The brandy has not yet taken effect. I assure you there is no reason to stir yourself up into a tempest, especially over Lemming Crane." "Oh, no," Tony blustered. "Nothing to stir myself up about. You just made me party to murder, for God's sake. Nothing at all out of the ordinary." Tony's face washed red with fury. "I don't mind thievery. Robbing tax collectors has been tolerably amusing, and I've never balked at teaching some tyrannizing ruffian a lesson for tormenting someone weaker than himself. I've even grown fond of wearing those ridiculous masks and playing Robin of the Hood. But this business with Crane makes my blood run cold. I should have told you to go to bloody hell." "That would have made things a bit awkward, don't you think?" Ian observed idly. "Insubordination can be dashed inconvenient." "Inconvenient?" Gray let out an impressive string of oaths, driving the toe of his boot into the leg of a mahogany table. A statue of Zeus in the guise of a swan seducing leader teetered, threatening to tumble into the tray of sweetmeats. "There's no need to attack the statuary, Tony," Ian said, reaching out to steady the statue. "I can assure you that your soul is no more blackened by what happened tonight than it ever was. Lemming Crane will be Pendragon's guest only for this one evening. Then, when he is sufficiently miserable, I shall slip into a rear entrance of the cave and lead him back into the light, along with a list of others foolish enough to serve as English spies." If anything, Tony's face grew more thunderous, almost sick with betrayal. "You never intended to leave him there?" Tony gripped his own glass of brandy so hard Ian expected it to shatter. "Oh, this time you plan to let him go?" Ian raised one dark brow and nodded in assent. "You bastard!" Tony hurled his glass against the wall, scattering shards of crystal across the room. "You could have told me what you were about." Ian cast a dismissive glance at the bits of glass. "I didn't know I was required to consult you." "You always have before. From the moment we conceived the idea of Pendragon, we were both as drunk as lords that night, if I remember, a condition I intend to seek out tonight in great fervour." "Ah, yes, get bloody drunk. That way you won't have to deal with anything or anyone. You won't have to be responsible if you're stubborn." "How I choose to deal with my life is none of your concern," Ian said, cutting him off. "I know that you think I can't get along without your advice, Tony, but we'll both have to get used to some changes. When you wed the virtuous Miss Mabley 3 months from now, I can hardly be running off to your bridal bower to discuss the most expedient way to extract information from a spy." "Why the hell not?" "You know why," Ian snapped savagely. "On the night we decided to take the path of rebellion, we agreed we'd involve no women or children in our lives. We're hunted men, Tony. A knife blade held to the throat of anyone we loved would jeopardize not only the two of us, but the entire band as well. Tell me, if Atwood or Glendenning had your Nora trussed up in a cosy little cell, what would you sacrifice to save her? How far would you go to—" "Hellfire. What's the point in hashing through all this again?" Ian bit off a curse. "It's for the best that you leave the raiders anyway. Any man as infatuated with a woman as you are with Nora can hardly be expected to summon up devotion to any cause except bedding her." "You don't understand, do you?" Tony asked lightly. "I love her, but that changes nothing about how I feel regarding freedom, independence. Because of Nora, I have more to fight for. I want to start a family with her someday, Ian. A future—" Ian gave a dark laugh. "And to think, everyone considers you the rational one between us. Ah, well, I've resigned myself to the fact that I can do nothing to sway you from this marriage, any more than I could stop you from getting into that duel with Manderley, where you almost got your head blown off." "You would compare love to that? By God, there are times when I think you've succeeded in forcing ice to flow through your veins in place of blood. Just 2 weeks ago you received a letter telling you that your only sister was dead, and you didn't show so much as a flicker of emotion. You merely tripled your wager and tossed out the dice." Ian looked away as images rose unbidden in his mind. His sister, beautiful, selfish Celestia Blackheath, forever seeking love from any man who would pay attention to her, from their dancing masters to their father's aged friends. Ian had been just 15 when he'd last seen her, but he would never forget how her eyes had shimmered with hate. She had loathed him, and he supposed he couldn't blame her. He had been Maitland Blackheath's only son, worthy of their father's constant, albeit negative, attention, while she was a mere daughter, to be shoved aside as if she were invisible. There had been a time when Ian had wanted to mend things between them, wished that they could share the grief over their mother's death, their father's selfishness. But there had been no room in Celestia's heart for forgiveness, no common ground for them to forge even the most fragile tie. There had only been the end of any illusion that a family had once existed in Maitland Blackheath's elegant Boston home. And now Celestia was dead. Ian had lounged at the gaming table after he received the news, knowing that he should feel something: sympathy, understanding, grief for this woman who had shared his blood. Instead, he had tightened a hard shell around his emotions and had cast out the dice. He drove away the memories and let his mouth curve into an arrogant grin, masking his feelings from Tony's perceptive gaze. "I won the wager that night, if I remember. Quite a handsome sum." "Damn you, Ian, stop this." "You must forgive me if I don't have your reverence for the sacred institution of family, Tony. My father was a selfish bastard hungry for sons, and my mother was a gentle if weak woman desperate to do her duty by him." Ian drained the brandy in a fiery gulp, the liquor loosening his tongue as he told about the childhood he'd barely spoken of in his 15-year friendship with Tony Gray. "I watched my mother waste away through 3 miscarriages and 2 stillbirths. I saw her bury 3 children who died before their first birthday." He twirled the stem of his goblet in restless fingers, staring at the candle fire dancing in the cuts in the crystal. "She was bedridden when I was 14, and the doctor said there must be no more children. When I was 15, I watched her stomach start to swell, and I knew my father had refused to keep his infernal breeches buttoned." Tony's face whitened with compassion. "I'm sorry." Ian winced, uncomfortable as always at Tony's uncanny ability to see past his carefully guarded facade to the man beneath. He forced a bitter laugh. "My father was sorry too, but he was far too virtuous a man to seek his pleasure in another woman's bed. Rather than condemn his immortal soul to hell for a dalliance, he condemned my mother to a slow, torturous death. That is what love means to me, Tony." Ian stiffened, the words he had spoken suddenly seeming to penetrate the haze of brandy and bitter memories, making him aware of just how much he had exposed to his friend, just how vulnerable he'd allowed himself to become. "It doesn't have to be that way," Gray said quietly. "Before I met Nora, I wouldn't have believed that—" "Enough, by God's blood!" Ian snapped. "I don't think I could endure listening to another litany of Miss Mabley's virtues. If you finished lecturing me about my mistreatment of Lemming Crane, I'd appreciate it if you'd go off to woo your lady love at once." Tony started to protest, stopped. "All right, no more about Nora. But as to Crane—" Tony paced to the window, shattered glass crunching beneath his boots. "Ian, I was not the only one among the raiders who was troubled by what happened tonight. I could feel their horror at what you were doing. They were afraid of you, sickened by what you had made them a part of." "Fear of the demon Pendragon is the most effective weapon we have against the English. I'm certain that by morning half of Virginia will have heard of the fate Crane supposedly suffered. Any spies left in this vicinity should be fleeing from Williamsburg in terror." "But your own men believe you murdered someone in cold blood." "It's possible that their fear of me is the most important of all. It'll keep them from questioning my orders at times when the merest hesitation might cost them their lives. I don't doubt it will save their necks one day. Either that or force them to betray you. Does it really matter whether it's one of the Crown's wolves who unmasks me, or one of my own men?" Ian stared meditatively into his brandy, swirling the amber liquid around the crystal bowl of his glass. "I suppose there are those who would say it should. I fear I'm far too cynical to trouble myself over such vague distinctions. No matter who brings me to face the King's justice, I will end up just as dead." "Sometimes I think that is what you want." Ian gave a shrug edged with an unaccustomed weariness. "Even the most brilliant gambler eventually faces ruin, Tony," he said. "We cast the dice every time we put on our masks and ride. Some day, my friend, even Pendragon will have to lose." Ian finished the last of his brandy, grateful to feel it smoothing the rough edges the night's hunt had left inside him. "Of course," he observed, "I've read that death is the greatest adventure of all. What do you think, Tony?" Ian levered himself to his feet and crossed to where a decanter glistened on a rosewood stand. Removing the cut-glass stopper, he poured himself another drink. He drank deep of the brandy, hoping to dull emotions that were too sharp and cutting, emotions he had escaped so often at the bottom of a bottle or in the arms of a beautiful woman. But tonight he sensed that even those familiar remedies would not ease the restlessness inside him. He glimpsed Tony regarding him with those eyes that reminded him of a spaniel's, soulful and caring, with an odd innocence, despite years of hell-raking almost as distinguished as Ian's own. Ian stripped off his frock coat and waistcoat, flinging them on the siège d'amour, a piece of furniture designed for entertaining multiple lady-loves at once. But even the sight of the damask-covered siège increased Ian's vague sense of loss, for it had been a gift from Tony, given as a jest one Christmas, in the days before Grey's devotion to the innocent Nora had dulled his thirst for such scandalous adventures. With impatient hands, Ian ripped free the neckcloth that had fallen in cascades of lace down his chest. "I think I preferred it when you were ready to call me out for a duel rather than having you stand there with the look of a father confessor on your face. Then I'll leave you in peace, just as soon as you tell me when we are to release our friend Mr. Crane from the cave." "We? Ian, until I place my ring on Nora's finger, you will not be rid of me. Crane must be half-crazed by now, and a madman is a dangerous thing." Ian forced a low chuckle. "Don't be an old woman, Grey. Crane will be so shaken after a brief stay as our guest that I could hold a loaded pistol to my heart, and I doubt he could manage to pull the trigger." "In your current state, you'd probably let him try it," Tony snapped, but Ian could see him battling valiantly against the smile that threatened the corners of his mouth. "Tell me when you're leaving, or—" The words died in Tony's throat, Ian tensing as well as they caught the sound of running feet hastening toward the chamber. "I thought you gave orders we were not to be disturbed," Tony said, his gaze narrowing on the door. "I did. Unless the blasted house is burning down, my servant should know better." One hand strayed to the hilt of the dagger concealed in Ian's Russian leather boot, while Tony's fingers rested with deceptive negligence on the hilt of the dress sword that hung at his waist. With instinct honed in countless nights of raiding, Ian took up a place favourable to defence and struck a casual pose, while Tony did the same. At that moment, the door flew open, revealing a black youth of about 16, dressed in silver livery. Obsidian eyes that had always snapped with fierce loyalty were filled with distress. "Sir, beg pardon to disturb," Priam stammered, but it's the most awful thing." Ian's gut clenched at the stricken expression on the youth's face. "Out with it, man," Ian snapped. "What the devil is amiss?" Some person is here, sir, and I wasn't sure what to do about it." "Soldiers?" "No, it is a vicar, sir," Priam said in a tone one would have used to describe the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. "What in blazes?" Ian's hand fell away from his knife as he gaped at this young man who had distracted whole companies of soldiers with an icy calm, and had suffered the even greater danger of juggling lies to Ian's more temperamental mistresses when his master was using the excuse of a romantic tryst as an alibi. A vicar? Priam's words echoed through Ian's mind. Fury rushed in to replace the tension of moments before. By God's blood, hadn't he endured enough? Ian thought. Crane's wailing, Tony's temper fit, his own grim memories. Now he was to be accosted by a vicar because Priam had failed to fling the man out the door. "Let me make certain I understand this," Ian said with quiet rage. "You raced down here, making me think half the English army was storming the gates when it was nothing but that idiot Dobbins plaguing me?" The servant's Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. "Yes, sir. No, sir. It's not Mr. Dobbins, sir. It's someone I've never seen hereabouts. A Mr. Edric Cliveden." In spite of the tension of moments before, Tony gave a low chuckle. "Cliveden? I've never heard of him, praise the saints. Dobbins must be recruiting holy men from other parishes to battle for your soul, Ian. All the more reason to hurl this Cliveden idiot off my property at once. Priam, you tell this bloody vicar the same thing I've told Dobbins for the last 15 years. Let him go to the devil in his own way and leave me in peace to go in mine." "I tried to tell him that, sir," Priam insisted. "Well, I didn't speak to him that way, but I told him you were otherwise engaged, and that you had an aversion to vicars. But the child, Mr. Cliveden said you must receive her, or he would come and haul you out of this wing himself." Child? Could this abominable mess get any worse? What the devil? Tony's face glowed with a touch of his old amusement. Some former mistress staking her claim upon your...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?